Well, today we are continuing in our journey through Zechariah, and we are in the ninth chapter of Zechariah. Still, not many congregations where you're going to hear 3 weeks on Zechariah chapter 9, or even was it 4? I'm not sure. But anyway, this is a very important chapter, very much a messianic-oriented chapter, very important to us. So if you have a Bible nearby, or you have the words of the Bible nearby, Zechariah chapter 9, and we're in the section here where this is a description of this great day of this great day of the Messiah. You know, back in verses 9 and 10, there we saw the great promise of the Messiah, and we related that very much to Yeshua, of course, entering Jerusalem on a donkey, and the theme of that was peace, humility also, but the main thing is peace. That we usually think of the Messiah as a warrior. That is generally the thought of, King Messiah is going to come and conquer, and defeat enemies. And while it is true that Messiah will come and judge and so on, the main thing that he's going to do is to establish peace. Okay? Whether the peace is concurrent with the judgment, or you have judgment and then peace. One thing that we always want to remember about these prophetic texts, and oftentimes prophetic texts that are kind of almost like apocalyptic in nature, with a lot of the imagery, we don't always know if they're linear in time exactly. You know what I mean? Like this is going to happen, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. Sometimes it's just happening. And it's like looking at a diamond, that from different angles, you see different things. And we know that at the consummation, when Messiah appears again as king of this world, when every knee bows and every tongue confesses Yeshua as Lord, all these different things will occur. And it will be amazing, certainly to see. But the main lasting thing is peace, okay? Very important. So that's what we see in verses 9 and 10, right? Is the Messiah coming, and of course, Yeshua rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and he laments, he cries over Jerusalem, and he says, if only you would have understood how peace really comes. If only you would have understood how peace really comes. Couldn't we say that in our world today? If only people understood how peace comes. Because since the creation and the fall of man, nobody has really understood how peace comes. Because one thing that every empire and every ruler from the beginning to now has in common is that they cannot establish peace. Never. Maybe a truce, maybe a subjugation of peoples, and so people live in peace. Like for example, during periods of the Roman Empire, certainly there was peace in the land, right? But they weren't really at peace, right? And so it only comes from God. It only comes via the Messiah, right? And so we see in verse 10, I will cut off the chariots from Ephraim, the horse from Jerusalem, the bow of war will be cut off, and so on. In the passage in the Haftorah for next week, at the end of Micah chapter 5, you see karati, I will cut off, of Israel, and the tools of war. It's very interesting. Now, he says it about the nations elsewhere that was really famous, right? Swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. Basically, the technology of war into John Deere products, right? Or something like that, right? But in these passages, in Micah 5 and here in Zechariah 9:10, he's speaking specifically about Israel. And it's really very interesting because later on he says that, right here, as we'll read in a second, that Israel will, in a sense, be turned into a bow. And Israel will be turned. So then the question is, well, which way is it? Is he cutting these things off of Israel, or is it warfare? We're not quite sure. Many would say that, well, first it's warfare, then there's peace. But the point of it is that it is a reversal of fortunes for Israel. And that is very important. It's a concept in the Bible, the reversal of fortune. What that means is that rather than nations subjugating Israel, persecution of Israel, judgment of Israel, the tables now are turned for Israel, and Israel is the victor. Israel is at peace. Israel is powerful, and Israel is repentant. And so we see here that the Messiah himself will be peace, will speak peace to the nations. His dominion will be from sea to sea and from river to the ends of the earth, right? Which takes on kind of new meaning in 2023 and 2024, that phrase. And now in verse 11 is where we're going to pick it up. And verse 11 to the end of the chapter is about what God is going to do, about restoration, So the first thing we see here is, as for you, in verse 11, as for you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. And so, of course, what jumps out at us here is the phrase, the blood of my covenant with you. Okay? What is that? Well, it comes from Exodus chapter 24, right? If you go back to Exodus in chapter 24, what is taking place here is, this is part of the story of Israel at Mount Sinai, right? This is actually taking place when you read chapter 19 and the end of chapter 20 and chapter 24, like in a row, like if you leave out where the Ten Commandments themselves, but you read all of chapter 19, and then what takes place in chapter 20 after the recitation of the Ten Commandments, and then chapter 24, that is all taking place at the same time. Okay? The written narrative telling us the Ten Commandments and the laws in chapter 21, 22, and 23 are not exactly part of the narrative. It is the way that Moses put together the book, put together Exodus, okay? To intersperse, when you read the Torah carefully, even in Leviticus and in Numbers especially, that you have narrative and then you have sets of laws. You have narrative and then you have sets of laws. And it's written that way on purpose. And one of the great fun things to do when you're studying the Torah is to try to understand, why are these laws placed here? Why are they placed here? Because they could have been placed elsewhere, right? When God gave Moses the Torah, right? What we're reading are pieces of what God gave him in different spots throughout the story that takes place. So anyway, here in chapter 24, here is Israel receiving, having this dramatic moment, right, of Mount Sinai and of the God telling them that he's entering into covenant with them as a people. They already are, in a sense, in covenant relationship with God. But now this is oftentimes referred to as the covenant of Moses, right? It is the covenant stipulations, but it is not a separate, it is not like a completely a separate covenant that doesn't have anything to do with what God promised Abraham. It's part of it. It is a part of that covenantal relationship. All right. So here is where one might say the covenant is ratified between God and the people, right? You have in chapter 19, you have the people, God saying, you are going to be a nation of priests, a holy nation, and the people say yes, but here is the ratification. And it comes, there's like a ceremony that takes place, right? So we see in verse 1, then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken we will do. By the way, that's all the laws that you read about, regardless of where they may be located in the text of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and in certain parts of Deuteronomy. Okay? And Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men of the sons of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as peace offerings to the Lord. And Moses took half of the blood and put it in basins, and the other half of the blood he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people. And I would suggest that's probably chapters 21 to 23. Okay? So do you understand that he didn't say this after chapter 23, that chapter 21 to 23 are the words of the covenant, and here is where Moses is reading it to the people. And then how do they respond? All that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. Oh, if it was only so, right? So Moses took the blood. Now, this is really interesting. This is a very unusual thing now that's going to take place. So Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. See, isn't that interesting? Sprinkled the blood on the people, okay? And said, behold, the blood of the covenant. There it is. Which the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. And then after that is when Moses goes up the mountain. There's some wonderful things about that, but not what we want to talk about right here. So why does he sprinkle people with the blood? Kind of a, do you want your clothes? It certainly would be a memorable thing, right? It would have been a memorable thing. And in those days, people, they didn't go home and take a shower. It would have been on them. And it was something that they would not have forgotten, right? And so I would suggest that sprinkling the blood on the people was a symbol of the relational connection between God and Israel. That it represented covenant relationship with the people in a very dramatic way, and in a very direct way. Not only sprinkling the blood on the altar, and the people are removed from it, and it's done on behalf of them, but this is on them, right? And so the covenant. This is what the people would remember about covenant relationship. But wow, we as a people are in this covenant. They don't have to just be told about Abraham and the splitting of the animals, or be told about Isaac and Jacob, right? Remember, this is long after Abraham, Isaac, hundreds of years after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so what's happening now is the whole nation is being identified with this covenant between God and the descendant. They are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so are we, of course. Now, the covenant itself, and this is important in understanding why Zechariah writes it this way, the covenant is based on the chesed of God. The covenant is, chesed is not the result of covenant relationship. Chesed is what's behind a covenant relationship. You could say the covenant between God and Israel, the great, what's also called the covenant of peace, the protection, the provision of God and the people's response is based on the loyal, steadfast love of God toward his people. That's why he enters into covenant relationship. Do we realize that when God entered into this kind of relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it's not just making a promise. The promise is, by the way, in Genesis chapter 12. That's a promise. That's, but the covenant technically comes in chapter 15 of Genesis. And it's actually in the ancient world, this would have spoken volumes to them. This was like signing on the dotted line. It's one thing to say we're going to enter into this kind of agreement. It's another thing to have it documented and signed. That is what we might say is the covenant, okay? And in the covenant is when God promises to protect and provide the people, and the people respond with, I will. This is how ancient kings would enter into relationship with subjugated peoples, by the way, right? That there would be this document. And the king would write down all the ways he's going to provide for the people. And the people would respond. And by the way, according to John Levinson, in his book, The Love of God, a very interesting book, he says in that book that in these ancient documents, the kings would use the word love. Like he would love the people. And the people would love the king. And what love meant was obedience, yieldedness, and the king would then love the people, not by inviting them over for dinner, but by protecting them and providing for them. And it's really helpful when you read, certainly, the Torah about God loving the people and the people's response, right? So in Psalm 89 is one of many passages that identify covenant with chesed, with his loyal love. So in Psalm 89, which is a fantastic psalm for a lot of reasons, it's a very prophetic psalm. In verse 28, he says, my loving kindness I will keep for him forever, and my covenant shall be confirmed to him. See, and so now you know that in Psalms, in Hebrew poetry, right, there is this, there's different kinds of parallelisms in the first line and second line of a psalm, okay, of a verse in a psalm. Sometimes the second line gives more information about the first line, or it says it in a different way, or it might even say the opposite. But the two lines are related. So when he says, my chesed, loving kindness, is chesed, right? Loyal love. There's no real great translation of the word chesed, right? Loving kindness, as we all know here, is a word that was made up in order to put in the King James Bible when the Bible was translated into English. It didn't exist in the English language before. And it was the translation of this word chesed, loving kindness. Loyal, steadfast love is probably a very good understanding of it. You know, it's more of a concept than a definition. You know, it's very hard to actually define, but it's more of a relational concept that those in some kind of covenant or in some kind of relationship have in common, of mutual kind of benefit, where there is we might say the obligation, in italics, the obligation of servanthood, of doing the right thing, right? Chesed is really, it's a heartfelt word that then materializes in different actions. That's why it's very close to the word mishpat, by the way, which is judge, like judgment or justice. That word that's used for justice, usually in the Hebrew Bible, basically means moral and ethical and equitable relationship toward people. Okay? And so it's a very meaty, heavy, important word. So my chesed I will keep for him forever, and my covenant shall be confirmed to him. Chesed and covenant are almost identical in what they're bringing out. Okay? So I will establish his descendants forever and his throne as the days of heaven. But as I was preparing this, I read the next few verses and I thought, oh, this gives an even greater understanding of loving kindness. Beyond being identified with chesed. Because in verse 30 it says, if his sons forsake my law and do not walk in my judgments, if they violate my statutes and do not keep my commandments, then I will visit their transgressions with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. But I will not break off my chesed from them, nor deal falsely in my faithfulness. It kind of reminds me of what Jared was saying about loathing the generation and loving and loving at the same time, right? And so notice here that God's covenant relationship, his chesed, is not based on obedience. Now, we can't appropriate it or have a real sense of it in our lives unless we're yielded to God. That's why you read tons of verses that say things like, I will show my mercy and loving kindness to those who love me and keep my commandments, right? It doesn't mean that you get God's, that God is not pouring out his mercy and his chesed upon you, but you can't appropriate it, it's kind of like if someone was giving you money and throwing it at you, but you don't pick it up, and just keep walking, right? So what, right? And the way we pick up God's chesed that he's constantly pouring on us is through yieldedness to him. See? That's why it is unconditional. But we know that where all this comes from is this famous passage. Then the Lord passed by in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in chesed and emet, right, in truth, who keeps loving kindness for thousands, who forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he will by no means leave the guilty unpunished, visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children's children and grandchildren to the third and fourth generations. Now, I'm going to tell you, over the years, from time to time, people will ask, it's only because I have it up here that I'm going to say this, does that mean, like, I look back at my family history, and I am in the fourth generation? So, no, this does not mean literally. I'm going to tell you that. Third and fourth generations. It means, it's to make the point that God will not leave the guilty unpunished, and the ramifications of sin can last for generations. Not that you're under a curse. Somebody made that up. Whoa. That is just not right. Okay? And by the way, if you know Messiah, even if you should believe in that kind of thing, it's broken in Messiah Yeshua. But the ramifications of sin can last for many generations, for children and children's children and children's children after that. Very, very important here that we understand that, okay? But the main part of this is that the Lord God is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in loving kindness and truth, and keeps loving kindness for thousands, and forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. And yet ramifications of this can go for generations. And that is why we need to embrace Messiah Yeshua, so that because our covenant relationship of Chesed with Messiah Yeshua overtakes these things. Very important. So this covenant relationship that goes all the way back to Exodus, right, includes lots of things that have taken place all throughout Israel's history. In Psalm 69, okay, in verse 16, we read this: "Answer me, O Lord, for your loving kindness, your chesed is good. According to the greatness of your compassion, turn to me, and do not hide your face from your servant. For I am in distress. Answer me quickly. O draw near to my soul and redeem it. Ransom me because of my enemies. Thou dost know, or you know my reproach, and my shame and my dishonor. All my adversaries are before me." And so they're in this section, as well as in a psalm like Psalm 139, which is a very long psalm, and every other verse is, God's mercy endures forever, right? But it includes rescue and forgiveness and compassion and restoration and protection and sustenance. And that is why he is praying according to your chesed, according to your loving kindness. And you can think, like what comes to mind, right? Psalm 51, Psalm 91, and lots of other places where chesed is identified with rescue and forgiveness and compassion and restoration and protection and sustenance, right? Okay. And so what we have here is a reversal of fortune for Israel based on the covenant, based on God's covenant relationship with Israel. And so what do we read here in back in Zechariah in chapter 9 in verse 11? Okay. "As for you, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free from the waterless pit." Perhaps a play on words of the Joseph experience, "Return to the stronghold, O prisoners, who have the hope. This very day I am declaring that I will restore double to you." God doubles down on his restoration. "For I will bend Judah as my bow. I will fill the bow with Ephraim, and I will stir up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece, and I will make you like the warrior's sword." Okay? And so here we see that according to his loving kindness, according to his covenant, according to what we have just been talking about, God will bring Israel back to the land, empower and strengthen them. Notice he says, return to the stronghold, O prisoners, who have the hope. Those who trust in God, those who see beyond what is currently going on. And certainly doesn't that relate to us? We have the hope, and as we'll see here in a second, that certainly in Messiah Yeshua, we are in a unique covenant relationship that assures us of the future, just as we see it here, right? We won't turn to it, but the words are reminiscent of Exodus 19 a little bit, where here he talks about blowing the trumpet, lightning, storm winds, and so on. It sort of conjures that up in verses 14, 15, and 16. The Lord will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning, and the Lord will blow the trumpet and will march in the storm winds of the south. Then the Lord of hosts will defend them, and they will devour and trample on the sling stones, and they will drink and be boisterous as with wine, and they will be filled like a sacrificial basin, drenched like the corners of the altar. And the Lord their God will save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they are as stones of a crown, sparkling in his land. See, all kinds of covenantal language is used, like the horns of the altar and so on and so forth. And because of that great promise from the past, Zechariah is saying, you are still in this covenant relationship, right? And then finally, in chapter 9, in verse 17 and 10:1, we have these words. For what comeliness and beauty will be theirs. Grain will be like the young men flourish, and new wine the virgins. Ask rain from the Lord at the time of the spring rain, the Lord who makes the storm clouds, and he will give them showers of rain, vegetation in the field to each man, or to each person. So with Israel's deliverance comes blessing, including agricultural prosperity, because Israel's covenantal God controls the weather and the rain. The result is a land of peace, prosperity, and plenty. And so this is a very physical way of understanding the covenantal relationship between God and Israel. But I will say, and go back to this again, when he says, to those who have hope. Remember what I said about the only way to appropriate a chesed, a covenant loyalty, the only way to appropriate it, to experience it in life, to take it and hold on to it, is when we yield to him. And those who have hope is speaking of the remnant of Israel, is speaking about those who, in this day, who trusted and believed in the Lord. And because Yeshua is the Messiah of Israel, not just according that we like to think he is, but because he is the Messiah of Israel, Yeshua reiterates this concept of the promise according to the blood of the covenant. Right? In Matthew chapter 26, when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for forgiveness of sins. This is at that last Seder, right? This is when Yeshua takes the matzah, right? And the cup. And with the cup, he says, drink from it. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. So he is identifying himself and what he is doing with God's covenant, right? Now, of course, we know that when he says the covenant, he's referring to another aspect of this, and that is what we call the Brit Chadashah, the new covenant, right? In the same way, he took the cup. This is Paul's rendition of this years later. In the same way, he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup and proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." And so what Yeshua came to do, if you go back to Jeremiah for a second, in Jeremiah chapter 31, we read here, "But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declare the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach again each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity and their sin, I will remember no more." Okay? And so what we see here is, it's not like the covenant exactly as Moses articulated it. This is the covenant when Messiah comes, that he will place the Torah within via the Ruach HaKodesh, right? And he will teach us, and we will know him. And you'll notice what it says, "And I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more." And so we are the recipients of this when we embrace the Messiah. The day is going to come, certainly, when Yeshua returns, that all of this, what we read about in Zechariah, will take place physically, in the land and among the people. But today, in Messiah Yeshua, we can experience this kind of deliverance and this kind of freedom in Messiah Yeshua, as he talks about to those who have the hope. And certainly that is in Messiah Yeshua, right? So in the book of Hebrews in chapter 9, "But when Messiah appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, he entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation, and not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption." And so he offered the blood of the covenant. And may I suggest that when we embrace Yeshua, the blood of the covenant is sprinkled upon us. We read this at the beginning of Peter's first letter. "Peter, an apostle of Messiah Yeshua, to those who reside as aliens, scattered through Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, who are chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and by the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to obey Messiah Yeshua and be sprinkled with his blood. May grace and peace be yours in the fullest measure." And so we have, as it were, that when Messiah was raised from the dead and ascended to the right hand of the Father, and when it says he sprinkled his blood on the holy place, we could say that, in a sense, we become the holy place, the temple, one might say, and that his blood is sprinkled upon us. In a way, one might say, reminiscent, as a metaphor anyway, that we read in Exodus 24, when we said that Moses sprinkled the blood on the people, and it connected them in covenantal relationship. And so Peter says this, I would suggest, as an echo of that passage in Exodus chapter 24, and that we are connected to Messiah Yeshua via his death and resurrection, ascension, and his priestly work at the right hand of the Father. And that we are the people of hope. And that there is a restoration for us as well. We know in verse 3, right? I don't think I didn't put it up here, right? I guess. But in verse 3 of 1 Peter chapter 1, right? That we have the living hope. In the very next verse, after sprinkled with his blood, we have the living hope because of the resurrection of the Messiah. There is an inheritance that is awaiting us, that we have this great future. And that was what Zechariah was saying to them. And we have this great future in Messiah Yeshua. And so here in Psalm 62, this is a great statement that we read in the Psalms and for us as well. My soul, which means I'm talking to myself, right? Wait in silence for God only, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. On God my salvation and my glory rest. The rock of my strength, my refuge is in God. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge to us. Selah. And so God is our refuge. He is our strength. He is our rock. He is our stronghold. We shall not be shaken because of this new covenant reality in Messiah Yeshua, because of what Messiah Yeshua has indeed done for us. And so, as Zechariah was saying, because of the blood of the covenant, yes, there is this tremendous future for the remnant of Israel. And so today, in the coming of the Messiah, there is a tremendous present and future for the remnant of Israel and of the nations. And so may we find encouragement in this, just as the people in Zechariah's day. So no matter where we're at in life, no matter what's happening, when we remember what God has done, and we read about these great passages of Scripture, may we be encouraged to know that Yeshua is an anchor of our hope, as the writer of Hebrews says. And may we stay focused on him and look forward indeed to that day.